Hi everyone, I'm Erin Underwood, and today I'm interviewing nominees in the novel category for the 2022 Shirley Jackson Awards, which recognize outstanding achievement in the literature of psychological suspense, horror, and the dark fantastic. As of the time of this recording, the winners for this year's Shirley Jackson Awards have not yet been announced, and we will be sure to add that information in the notes below. Now, I am delighted to introduce Sophie White. Sophie's novel, Where I End, was published by Tramp Press and was nominated for this year's 2022 Shirley Jackson Awards. Sophie White is a novelist, essayist, podcaster, and she's from Dublin. And I'm delighted that she is able to join me here today. Sophie, welcome. It's so nice to have you here.
Oh, I'm thrilled to be here. Thank you for having me.
Oh, you're welcome. Absolutely. So I'm delighted to hear that your novel was nominated for the Shirley Jackson Awards. It's really one of my favorite awards out. And I would love it if you could just maybe give the audience a little quick bite-sized description of what your novel is about, or give them kind of a feel of what they can expect with the book.
Oh, sure. Obviously, it's very much in the horror space. I totally set out to do that, and I find it quite hard to boil my books down to something succinct. So I'm going to read the back of the book. The book is about a teenager called Elin, who has never left the island where she's grown up. It's a wild place off the west coast of Ireland. It's kind of a cursed place, really. And she has grown up in a house with her silent, bed-bound mother, who is a wreckage in the bed, the survivor of a private disaster that no one will speak about. Elin has no idea what has happened to her mother. She has just always been this way. And so Elin lives with her grandmother, and their days are spent caring for her mother and trying to kind of beat back the decay that happens to a person when they're bedbound. Elin desperately wants a family. She knows that there's something missing from her life, which is love and a mother. And so when a young artist called Sarah moves to the island with her baby, Elin finds a focus for her relentless love.
That sounds very sad and bittersweet and wonderful at the same time.
Yeah. Well, like I've had, back when the book first came out, or friends were reading early drafts of it, they would text me as they were going and be like, "Oh, I feel so sorry for Elin," and
Oh,
and I'd always be like, "What page are you on?" Because Elin is quite a very dark character. I mean, I was very taken with this kind of question of what kind of person is produced by that kind of really deprived environment. And it's quite funny because I've written 5 novels, and this is my only horror so far. And it's actually, of all of the novels, probably contains the most autobiographical elements, which people do not expect. And it's probably a terrible thing to have to say about your own life. But the novel was really born out of this experience of having a parent who was bedbound and, in a kind of a vegetative state. Now, it was my dad, and it wasn't for my whole life. He was an amazing, wonderful father, and he got early onset Alzheimer's when he was really young. And the way his illness progressed, and it's so different for everyone, he kind of wound up just really bedbound, silent, really no sense of whether he was conscious or aware of us or not. And that was kind of for the last 3 years of his life. And
wow.
so I kind of had this, thing where I kind of kept vigil, so did my mother, at his bedside. And all these kind of hours at his bedside, you know, I was constantly, trying to find ways to connect with him. Anyone who's had a very ill loved one knows you're trying to reach across this divide and express your love for them, even when they may not really be responding or able to respond. And I
Right.
got really fixated on this idea of like, what if me and my father had never had such a fantastic relationship? What if this was the only parent I'd ever known? And so that was where Elin was born, kind of at that bedside. And yeah, so
That's amazing. I think, in my opinion, I think that the best horror or the best dark fiction comes from some kernel of truth inside the author that they then bring out and unfold in different ways with different stories and characters. And it sounds like you really tapped into something. And of course, you put in a lot of imagination and fiction into that story.
yeah.
Uh, but wow, that sounds really interesting. It sounds like actually the kind of thing that, now, I will admit I haven't read the novel yet, but I have taken a quick look at it before we have this conversation, and it definitely looks like something that I would enjoy. I love that psychological dark truth that comes out in stories like yours. So
Yeah.
I'm curious with the characters. With Elin, I can see that maybe where she's the main character. Maybe she's your favorite character, maybe she's not. But do you have a favorite character in the book? And if it's not Elin, who is it? That's what I'm super curious about.
Well, I do love Elin. The whole book is, as a reader, we inhabit Elin totally. We never see another character's point of view. And, I find Elin just, I mean, really fascinating.
Hmm.
She's very resourceful. And there is a kind of like dormant passion in her
Yes.
that is kind of awakened when the young artist mother comes to the island. And so I mean, to be honest, I root for Elin all the way through, even though she does some stuff that's objectively horrifying. And um, not to give too much away. But I'm fascinated by her, and I think she's a survivor.
Yes.
And I was very, a lot of people actually in reviews have kind of likened her to Mary Cat, which is just the most incredible compliment. And but also when I was kind of creating her, I was very inspired by Tom Ripley in
Mhm.
the Patricia Highsmith series, because again, I just see Tom Ripley as like a real survivor, and he just does what he has to do. And I think that Elin is quite like that. I did also love writing the character of Sarah, the artist, because she is brand new to motherhood and she is in that space. It's called matrescence. It's the point just after you've had a child, and you're in a kind of a very strange, kind of almost liminal space, um, where you're quite disconnected from both worlds. You're disconnected from your previous world and you're disconnected from the kind of current world. And so I loved writing her. And also, my background is in art. I did fine art when I was studying. That's my kind of
Mhm.
qualification. So it was lovely to kind of revisit the artist brain and the artist life in the book. But it's very like nearly everyone in the book is a mother. And I was very interested in our family's ability to create our realities.
Right.
And I think that's kind of going back to that thing that you were describing of the kernel of truth, kind of like, hiding, lying in wait inside every horror story. And, I was very interested in that kind of terrifying mother figure that we have in horror, all the time. And I think I remember when I became a mother, I was so actually terrified by this new power where I was the universe to this baby. I was its complete entirety. I loomed over the baby's perspective and filled it. And even when you first have a baby, the baby kind of is almost like your parasitic twin. It like it lives on your body. Your body is the country that it lives on. And so I think that kind of terrible power of the mother, like, obviously has just historically always been a point of obsession in horror. And I could not explore it here in Where I End, you know. Um, so I think the fact that it's set on an island, and within the island, Elon's family are outcasts. They because
Mhm.
the islanders believe they are kind of cursed. And then I kind of think that, like, the family unit is an island as well. Like, we all kind of,
So it kind of drills down in a way.
yeah, it just kind of distills and distills down. Yeah,
Mhm.
exactly.
That's really interesting. One of the things that stood out to me from the description and what you've been talking about is, and it's actually a relation to Shirley Jackson herself with some of her work, and how the house becomes a central character in many ways. Can you
Mm.
talk a little bit about how that structure, how that confinement within that unit impacted the storytelling or the events of the story, or even your
Yeah,
imagination of it?
yeah, absolutely. I mean, when I was researching the book, I went to one of our islands off the west coast of Ireland, a place called Inishmaan, that is an incredibly beautiful and strange island. And it's also,
Beautiful.
yes, totally beautiful, and very, like, it's kind of an uncanny place. Like, there is an
Mhm.
atmosphere there. Um, and it's also a place that, like, is kind of very alive in the Irish kind of literary tradition. There's a lot of writers who've become quite obsessed by Inishmaan, and I'm one of them, obviously. And so I went there to, like, just immerse myself in a landscape that is close to the one I was trying to create. And the island, the real island, gave me so much for creating my. It's an unnamed island in Where I Am, but it's not Inishmaan, but it's not Inishmaan. And so there was a lot of, like, derelict buildings and things like that on Inishmaan, and the kind of topography of the island's really unusual. It has, like, a low beach at one end that almost feels kind of like tropical, and then it kind of swoops up to very high cliffs, very sheer cliffs at the back of
Mhm.
it. And I was seeing things like these kind of derelict buildings that the windows were stuffed with shards of rock. That's a detail that is in Where I End, and I lifted it wholesale from reality. Also, like, a lot of the buildings in the west of Ireland are built out of stone. A lot of the walls are built out of stones that have no cement or anything. Like,
Mhm.
you can look through the walls, and you can hear through the walls. And the gaps create strange sounds with the wind. And so, they have a wall like that in the house, a kind of a wheezing wall that kind of thrums with a life. And then they've kind of had to, um, Elin and her grandmother have had to kind of dismantle the interior of the house to create, the kind of apparatus that they use for taking care of the mother, who they call the bed thing. And so they have things like her bed is on hinges to crank her upright, feeding. you know the bathroom has pulleys and winches for, and it's, again, like, this is very much, taken from the practicalities of looking after a person like that,
Right.
that obviously, was a part of my experience. And obviously, in hospitals and hospices, it's incredible people who work in the industry, and they have such, like, the dignity of the person is literally the very first top most important
Right.
concern. But it's not in Where
Right.
I End. In Where I End, I was very interested in exploring the kind of the burden of care, and how that can foster real resentment, and then it can really mutate into you know hatred. And you know
Yeah. And I
so
think a lot of people actually experience that to some degree. You know,
mm,
I hate saying that out loud, but when a loved one becomes burdensome, like I feel so awkward just saying it. Yeah, because my mom passed away, and when she had cancer, the one thing she never wanted to be was the burden of the family, and yet that's what you become in every need. You can no longer take care of yourself, and it becomes the burden of the living, able-bodied living, to care for the other.
Yeah,
And you can't help but to have feelings about that, whatever those feelings are.
absolutely. I think in the novel as well, I'm so sorry you experienced that. It's just so tough. Um, and grief is a very strange
Yeah,
terrain that changes, and it's a shapeshifter, isn't it?
it
You
really
have
is.
to you have to kind of keep meeting your grief, don't you? It's so strange that the way you constantly have to meet it in its new form and on and on. Um, with the novel, I think obviously there is a central question of what has happened to the bed thing.
Right.
And I think where things start to get very like fraught is when the bed thing appears to start communicating with Elin. Um, and I think that that almost makes it even more complicated, because then Elin starts to get a sense that actually there is some kind of consciousness
Right.
in her mother, and all the kind of questions that throws up,
Yeah.
um, and all the while she is kind of latching to this new family in quite a kind of parasitic kind of way.
Yeah. Oh, it sounds like such a good novel, and I hope
Thank you.
that everybody who watches this video will go out and read it, because it sounds absolutely fascinating.
Yes.
Sophie, we're a little short on time, and I want to make sure to get to what you're doing next. So you finished this novel, you've been nominated for a Shirley Jackson Award. What are you working on now? What's coming up for you?
What's coming up for me is I'm working on a couple of TV projects that are
Mhm,
adaptations of earlier books, both kind of comedies,
mhm.
because that's just a very natural bedfellow for horror. Um,
Right.
and I am working on my new novel.
Mhm.
It's in the very early stages, so I'm literally planning it on large sheets of card, which is the way it begins for me.
Right.
And so yeah, I'm loving it.
That's awesome. Well, good luck with your nomination.
Thank you.
Of course, I can't take favorites, but good luck with your nomination. And I think there are good things for you in the future. It sounds like you've got a lot going on.
Yeah, I hope so.
Well, thank you so much for joining me, Sophie. It has been so nice to have you here.
Thank you so much, Erin.
All right. So, I just want to wrap up here and thank everybody for watching. The 2022 Shirley Jackson Awards will be announced on July 15 at Readercon, the Conference of Imagination and Literature. Jeff VanderMeer and Ann VanderMeer will be our ceremony hosts. And as a reminder, the awards are run by volunteers on a shoestring budget, and they are always happy to receive a donation just to keep the lights on. So please visit shirleyjacksonawards.org for more information about the Shirley Jackson Awards. Again, thank you so much for watching and supporting the awards. We'll see you next time.